Saturday mornings in my neighborhood usually started with the chirp of sprinklers and the smell of burnt toast drifting from someone's kitchen window. Mine started with a spark, a hiss, and the unmistakable silence of my ham radio dying mid-transmission. 1 second, I was bouncing a signal across half the country, chatting with a guy in Montana about his cattle ranch. The next, I was staring at a dead rig, the lights flat, the room empty except for the faint smell of ozone. I knew instantly it wasn't a coincidence. Things don't just stop working like that unless someone wanted them to. I stepped outside and there she was. Karen. 40-something, aggressively styled bob haircut, power walking across my side yard with a pair of pruning shears in her hand like she'd been cutting roses. Only there were no roses. Just a freshly severed length of coaxial cable dangling like a limp vein from the side of my house. She had that smug HOA president stance, chin lifted like she was posing for a profile picture nobody asked for. "This eyesore is a violation," she declared before I even opened my mouth. "You were warned about unauthorized antennas." I didn't rise to it. I've learned over the years that when you play chess with someone like Karen, you let them make the first 20 dumb moves while you quietly set up checkmate. So I just stared at her and said, "You know, cutting federally regulated communication lines is a crime." Her lips twitched, but she didn't back down. She snapped the shears shut with a metallic click, like punctuation. "This neighborhood has rules," she said, "and I enforce them." What she didn't understand, and what I wasn't about to explain to her smug face, was that the ham radio wasn't just a hobby. It was tied into emergency services, storm spotting, and yes, federal licenses. People like her thought antennas were just metal poles cluttering their HOA-approved skyline. In reality, they were lifelines. The moment she cut that cable, she crossed into territory where agencies with 3-letter acronyms start paying attention. I went back inside and powered down the rest of the rig. Calm. Deliberate. If she wanted war, I'd let the right people fight it. All I had to do was report the interference and sabotage to the amateur radio enforcement desk. That's how the game works. Quiet documentation, let the professionals handle the fallout. But as I filled out the online incident report, I couldn't help imagining the look on her face when she learned this wasn't like complaining about someone's mailbox paint. The neighborhood grapevine kicked in within hours. Karen paraded around telling anyone who'd listen that she'd finally dealt with the illegal radio tower like she'd just shut down a cartel. My neighbor Jeff dropped by that evening, shaking his head. "You know she was bragging at the pool? Said she cut your spy cables before you could report the neighborhood to China." He laughed, but I didn't. It wasn't funny. It was dangerous, and she was too wrapped up in her own imagined authority to realize it. 2 days later, the black SUVs rolled in. Not one, not two, 3 of them, with government plates and that practiced, no-nonsense park job where all the doors open at once. I was on my porch sipping coffee, pretending to be surprised when they approached. The lead agent flashed credentials so fast they might as well have been blank paper. "We need to talk about your equipment." My pulse didn't even spike. I had nothing to hide. But I could see Karen across the cul-de-sac, standing frozen with her mouth slightly open, clutching a gardening glove like it was a lifeline. The agents walked through my setup, asked about frequencies, licensing, the usual. Professional, efficient, not unfriendly. When I explained the sudden equipment failure and showed them the cleanly snipped coax outside, they exchanged a glance that said everything. They already knew. They didn't need me to name her. The footprints in the dirt, the cut angle, the neighbors who'd overheard her boasting, it was a slam dunk. One of the agents asked me to step outside for a moment. Across the street, Karen had inched closer, curiosity overriding self-preservation. That's when the agent turned, pointed directly at her, and said, "Ma'am, did you tamper with this individual's communication lines?" Her face went through about 6 expressions in 3 seconds: shock, indignation, denial, calculation, and finally, that tight-lipped superiority she always wore like armor. Those cables were against HOA rules, she said firmly, as though that settled federal jurisdiction. The agent's expression didn't even flicker. Ma'am, these are federally licensed communication lines. Cutting them is a violation of federal law. You're going to need to come with us. The way her knees buckled, I thought she might collapse right there on the pavement. Instead, she stammered something about neighborhood safety and illegal towers endangering property values. It didn't matter. They weren't hearing her. Neighbors started gathering on lawns, phones discreetly recording. This was better than reality TV. The iron-fisted HOA president being questioned by federal agents in broad daylight. It was the kind of spectacle people waited their whole suburban lives to witness. I stood quietly on my porch, coffee still steaming, watching her world crumble in real time. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot. Karen wasn't the type to go quietly. She'd twist, claw, and dig in deeper, convinced that rules bent around her. But for the first time since she moved in, the neighborhood saw her power cracking. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the opening move. What I didn't know was just how far she'd take it, or how much higher the stakes were about to get. Because Karen didn't see the FBI visit as a warning, she saw it as a challenge. And when someone like her feels cornered, they don't retreat. They escalate. The neighborhood has a rhythm, a pulse you can almost set your watch to. Lawn crews on Tuesday, trash trucks on Thursday, HOA letters conveniently arriving on Fridays to ruin your weekend. But after the black SUVs left, the rhythm stuttered. People whispered on sidewalks instead of shouting across lawns. Kids rode their bikes a little slower past my house, eyes darting toward the severed cable like it was some sort of crime scene tape. And Karen? Karen disappeared for 3 whole days, which was both the quietest and most suspicious stretch of time since she'd moved in. On the 4th morning, the silence broke. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when a stack of papers landed on my porch with a slap. No envelope, no polite knock. Just a stapled packet with the HOA logo and Karen's looping signature at the bottom of every page, like a monarch stamping her approval on new decrees. The top line screamed, "Emergency Community Safety Directive." My antenna was listed in bold as a classified hazard. According to the document, I had exactly 7 days to dismantle my entire setup or face escalating enforcement actions. I laughed out loud. Not just because she'd written this after federal agents had literally explained to her face that my equipment was licensed and legal, but because she had the audacity to double down. That was Karen in a nutshell. If reality didn't align with her version of the rules, she didn't bend, she rewrote. By noon, I had 3 neighbors texting me screenshots of the HOA group chat where Karen declared that rogue frequencies from my ham rig were interfering with garage doors, baby monitors, even pacemakers. The absurdity would have been funny if I didn't know how quickly lies metastasize in a suburban ecosystem. Already, people were chiming in about their Wi-Fi acting up or their Alexa mishearing command. Confirmation bias at its finest. She wasn't just attacking me anymore. She was building a case, manufacturing paranoia. I knew better than to post a rebuttal in the chat. Arguing with Karen in writing was like throwing gasoline on her bonfire. Instead, I made calls. First to the amateur radio liaison who'd handled my initial report, then to a buddy of mine who worked storms with me during tornado season. He reminded me of the golden rule: document everything. So I did. I logged the fake directive, the messages, the threats. Quietly, meticulously, like someone stitching together a net. 2 days later, she escalated again. I came home from work to find bright orange flags planted across my front yard. They traced a zigzag pattern that looked like a toddler's attempt at crop circles. On the flags, survey marker. My stomach sank. Karen wasn't just making noise anymore, she was making moves. I cornered the utility worker still adjusting his clipboard on the curb. He looked apologetic. "Got a request from your HOA. Said there was unauthorized underground wiring we had to inspect." There wasn't, of course. My cables were above ground and fully permitted. But Karen had weaponized city services against me, dragging them into her fantasy of control. The worker shrugged helplessly, said they'd file the report and close it out once they saw nothing was amiss. Still, the message was clear. Karen was laying groundwork for something bigger. That night, the group chat exploded again. This time, it wasn't just Karen. A handful of board members piled on, parroting her nonsense about my illegal station. Someone even suggested my antenna could be attracting lightning to the neighborhood. The irony being that I was the only one with a grounded surge arrestor system. Facts, however, weren't welcome guests in Karen's court. The turning point came when she filed an official noise complaint with the county. She claimed my transmissions were keeping her up at night. I knew it was fabricated. I rarely transmitted past 10, and radio signals don't exactly thump through walls like bass speakers. But the sheriff's deputy who knocked on my door was obligated to follow up. He was polite, professional, clearly embarrassed. After glancing at my logbook and equipment, he all but apologized. "Sorry, sir. Looks like you're in compliance. We'll mark this closed." The problem was, Karen was watching. She stood at the edge of her driveway the entire time, arms crossed, daring me to make eye contact. When the deputy left without hauling me away in cuffs, she looked rattled but not defeated. If anything, her eyes burned hotter, like she'd just been challenged to double her efforts. That's when the strange interference started. My rig lit up with static bursts that didn't make sense. Not atmospheric noise, not crossband chatter. Artificial, deliberate. Somebody was jamming. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Bad weather, maybe sunspots. But then the bursts lined up exactly with my callout. Every time I keyed up, the noise slammed through, drowning me out. It didn't take long to put 2 and 2 together. Karen had found a way to hit me on my own turf. It sounds impossible, but all it takes is a cheap signal jammer ordered off the internet. Illegal, yes, but exactly the kind of thing Karen would think was clever. She wouldn't know about the penalties, the fines, the prison sentences tied to intentional interference. To her, it was just another tool to enforce community harmony. To me, it was proof she was willing to escalate from cutting wires to playing with federal fire. I filed another report, this one urgent. Interference isn't just annoying, it's dangerous. Emergency calls ride those frequencies. Pilots, first responders, storm chasers. Blocking them isn't neighborhood squabbling. It's potentially life and death. And once again, Karen had crossed a line she didn't even understand. The very next evening, 2 unmarked sedans joined the SUVs on my street. This time, they didn't knock politely. They walked straight to Karen's house. I stood on my porch as the agents rapped on her door, hard enough to echo. When she answered, her face froze into that practiced smile she used for HOA meetings. They didn't even let her get a word out. One agent held up a device, portable spectrum analyzer. I recognized it instantly, and said, "Ma'am, we traced the source of unlawful interference to this residence." Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd of neighbors. Phones came out again, recording. Karen sputtered denials, pointing toward my house like a child blaming a sibling. But the analyzer's screen didn't lie. They'd caught the jammer red-handed, broadcasting from somewhere inside her home. The agents didn't arrest her on the spot. That's not how it works. But the warning they delivered was ice-cold. This is a federal offense. Do not tamper with radio equipment again. Do not purchase or operate unauthorized transmitters. Next time, there won't be a warning. For once, Karen didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, cheeks blotchy red, clutching her front door like it might keep her from toppling over. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated. But as I watched her retreat inside, slamming the door behind her, I knew this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't process shame the way normal humans did. They alchemized it into vengeance. And if she thought she'd lost the upper hand, she was already planning her next strike. The problem was, I had no idea how far she was willing to go, or how high the stakes were about to climb. By the time the week ended, the whole neighborhood buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. Everyone had an opinion, and most of them were bad takes. Some folks thought Karen had been unfairly targeted, others whispered that she was running some kind of spy station from her living room, and a few just admitted they were glad someone was finally keeping her occupied. The tension was thick enough to taste like iron in the back of your throat. For me, it was a waiting game. I kept my logs up to date, checked my rig every night, and played it cool. Outwardly calm, inwardly calculating. But Karen didn't stay quiet long. She never did. A woman like her thrives on control, and when the FBI left her house with nothing but a warning, it ate her alive. 2 mornings later, I woke to the sound of hammering. I looked out my window, and there she was in all her glory, standing at the edge of my property line with 2 board members in tow. They were erecting a sign, a massive sheet of plywood spray-painted with block letters. Danger, illegal radio station, hazard to health. The absurdity would have been hilarious if it wasn't happening 10 feet from my driveway. They even staked it into my lawn, not hers, like she owned the dirt under my grass too. I walked out slowly, coffee mug in hand, and gave her a single raised eyebrow. "Bold move," I said, "trespassing while committing libel." Her face twitched, but she didn't flinch. "The community deserves protection," she replied, as if she were Joan of Arc defending Paris. I didn't pull the sign down. Not yet. Instead, I took a picture. Then I took 5 more, from every angle, time-stamped, geotagged. My documentation folder was turning into a Karen shrine, a catalogue of entitlement. Let her bury herself. By that evening, my inbox pinged with a copy of an email chain she'd blasted to the entire HOA mailing list. She'd filed a formal petition to revoke my residency on the grounds of endangering neighbors with experimental broadcasts. She even attached a shaky cell phone video of my antenna during a lightning storm, claiming it was attracting unnatural weather events. If it hadn't been so malicious, it would have been comedy gold. I considered ignoring it. But then came the twist. She wasn't just waging war in the neighborhood anymore. She'd gone public. Someone tipped me off that she'd posted on a local Facebook group for community safety, warning of a rogue operator transmitting dangerous frequencies in violation of federal law. She even included my address. That's when the situation stopped being funny. Because within hours, strangers started showing up. Not in droves, but enough. A pickup slowed in front of my house, the driver glaring like I was a meth cook. A woman parked across the street and filmed my yard for 10 minutes straight. Every time I keyed up the mic, I wondered if some keyboard warrior was sitting in his basement, convinced I was plotting against the grid. I called my storm spotter buddy again. He didn't mince words. "She's making you a target, man. This isn't HOA drama anymore. This is doxing." He was right. The stakes had jumped another rung. So I escalated on my end too, but quietly. I reached out to the amateur radio enforcement desk again, this time forwarding Karen's Facebook posts and the petition email. I framed it simply: harassment, libel, potential incitement. They didn't respond right away, but I knew it was in the system now. Karen thought she was tightening the noose around me, but she was really building a federal case file, with her name stamped all over it. Still, life went on. The sprinklers clicked, kids screamed on trampolines, the UPS guy dropped packages. On the surface, the neighborhood pulsed with normalcy. But underneath, everyone was watching the standoff. And Karen wasn't done. One night, just after sunset, I heard it, the faint metallic scrape of someone messing with my side gate. I slipped outside with a flashlight, heart steady. And there she was, Karen herself, crouched like a burglar, her phone flashlight illuminating the bundle of cables leading into my shack. She was taking pictures, dozens of them, from every angle, muttering to herself about evidence. I didn't confront her right away. I let her stew for a full minute before I clicked on my own beam, spotlighting her like a deer. "Collecting souvenirs?" I asked casually. She jolted upright, face pale, words tripping. "This is official documentation," she snapped, as if sneaking onto private property at night was a legal process. I didn't argue. I just pulled out my own phone, recorded her standing inside my fence line with her flashlight, and said, "Thanks for the admission." She stormed off, but I could tell she was rattled. Karen thrived in HOA boardrooms where she controlled the agenda. Being caught red-handed in the dark wasn't her battlefield. The next morning, the retaliation came. My mailbox was stuffed with anonymous flyers claiming I was illegally broadcasting, complete with fake diagrams of brain cancer caused by radio waves. Neighbors muttered about headaches, pets acting weird, bad Wi-Fi. Karen had successfully manufactured panic. And panic spreads faster than truth. By midweek, a special HOA meeting was called. I attended, sitting quietly in the back while Karen strutted at the front like a general addressing troop. She whipped up fears, waving her phone full of pictures of my cables. "This is what's endangering your children," she barked, pointing in my direction like I was on trial. When the floor opened for questions, I stood calm, even. No sarcasm this time, just fact. Everything she has said is false. My station is licensed. Federal agents confirmed it. The only illegal equipment found was at her house. And if anyone doubts that, I have documentation. Then I pulled up the video of her trespassing, her own words about official documentation echoing through the room. The silence that followed was delicious. But Karen didn't collapse. She never did. She doubled down. "He doctored that video," she shouted, voice shrill. "This is all part of his cover-up." Some people rolled their eyes, others looked uneasy. The board didn't vote against me, but they didn't shut her down either. Cowards, all of them, afraid of her wrath. The meeting ended in chaos, voices overlapping, sides forming. As I walked out, Jeff fell into step beside me. "She's losing it," he muttered. "But she's not done. Watch your back." He was right again. Because that night the interference on my rig changed. It wasn't just static anymore. It was voices. Distorted, deliberate, breaking in mid-frequency with garbled taunt. Someone was hijacking. And from the cadence, the tone, I'd bet my license it was Karen, or someone she'd roped into her crusade. This wasn't petty harassment anymore. This was active sabotage, bordering on terrorism in the eyes of the FCC. And the way I saw it, she was digging her own grave, one illegal stunt at a time. I just had to keep recording, keep playing the long game, and wait for the collapse. The only question was how many people she'd drag down with her when it came. The day after the chaotic HOA meeting, the air in the neighborhood felt like a taut wire ready to snap. People avoided eye contact, lawns went unmowed, and the pool stayed eerily empty even though the sun was shining. Karen had turned our cul-de-sac into a Cold War zone where everyone wondered who was watching whom. I could feel her eyes on my house even when her curtains were drawn. She'd lost the narrative at the meeting but, like always, she wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. I kept my routine normal, morning jog, coffee on the porch, tinkering with my Radio Shack. But inside, my brain ran scenarios like a chess engine. Karen had already cut my cables, doxed me, planted signs, jammed frequencies, and snuck onto my property. The next logical step was either property damage or dragging in law enforcement again. She was addicted to escalation. She needed the next hit. By midweek, the signs began. Not the big plywood ones. Smaller, subtler things. Yellow spray-painted X's appeared at the edge of my driveway overnight. A red ribbon tied around the base of my antenna mast. A handwritten note in my mailbox, unsigned, reading, "We know what you're doing," in blocky letters. Amateur intimidation tactics, but effective at one thing, telling me she was done hiding. Jeff swung by that afternoon with a six-pack, sitting on my porch steps like we were two guys watching a slow-motion car wreck. "She's unraveling," he said, nodding toward Karen's house where her blinds twitched. "Half the board's scared of her, the other half's embarrassed. But nobody's willing to tell her no." He paused. "You think she's dangerous?" I took a sip and stared at the cut marks still visible on my coaxial line, now replaced with reinforced conduit. I think she's desperate, I said. And desperate people do stupid things. That night I caught her again, not in person but on my security cameras. She'd crept into my yard with a flashlight and a tape measure, scribbling notes on a clipboard like she was preparing a zoning lawsuit. When I confronted her the next morning with the footage, she didn't deny it. She just smirked. "You're going to regret defying me," she said, tone icy. "This community has rules." It was almost funny, her imagining herself as some kind of suburban lawgiver, but the humor didn't last. 2 days later, my entire Radio Shack went dark. Not just a cut cable this time, total power loss. The breaker had been tripped externally, and when I went outside, I found the lock on my external panel pried off and tossed into the grass. That was my line. She'd gone from harassment to breaking and entering. And I wasn't going to play passive anymore. I called the sheriff, filed a formal criminal complaint, and handed over my video evidence. The deputy who showed up this time wasn't apologetic. He was serious, writing notes, taking photos of the damage. When he left, he promised a detective would follow up. Word spread fast. Karen tried to spin it in the group chat, claiming she was inspecting an unsafe installation after multiple complaints. But the mood had shifted. Neighbors started posting my video clips. Karen trespassing, cutting cables, creeping with her tape measure, without me asking. For the first time, she was losing her audience. That evening, something new happened. A white van with no markings rolled up to my house and parked across the street. 2 men in plain clothes stepped out and walked directly to my door. My stomach tightened until I saw the laminated badges. FCC Enforcement Bureau. They were polite but brisk. "We're following up on a pattern of interference and sabotage linked to this area," one said. I invited them in, showed them everything. My logs, Karen's fake directives, the Facebook posts, the footage of her trespassing. They listened, took notes, asked precise questions about dates and times. Then they surprised me. "We've been monitoring illegal transmissions originating from this block," the taller one said. "Your equipment's clean. Hers isn't." They didn't need to say hers. We all knew who they meant. Apparently, the signal jamming Karen had been doing hadn't stopped after the FBI warning. It had increased, and now the FCC had her squarely in their sights. They asked me to do one thing: keep my station running exactly as usual. "We're building a case," the shorter agent said. "Consistency helps us track interference patterns." I agreed, of course. Let them catch her red-handed. For a few days, life returned to a tense kind of normal. Karen stayed mostly inside, curtains drawn, car unmoved. The signs came down. The group chat went silent. Even Jeff admitted he almost felt sorry for her. "She's like a caged animal now," he said. Probably realizing she went too far. But Karen wasn't realizing anything. She was plotting. It started with an anonymous flyer slipped under my door. Final notice: remove antenna or face legal action. Then came a new fake directive, this time claiming my station violated emergency frequency protections, and that the HOA had coordinated with federal authorities to shut it down. Classic Karen tactic: use the very people investigating her as leverage. Then one night, at 3 a.m., I woke to a metallic crash. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside to find my antenna mast leaning at a crooked angle, the guy wires slashed. Someone had tried to pull it down but given up halfway, leaving it bent but standing. My security cameras caught only a shadowy figure darting away. The footage wasn't clear enough for a positive ID, but I didn't need one. This time I didn't just call the sheriff. I called the FCC agents directly. They arrived the next morning in the same white van, looked at the damage, and shook their heads. "We told her not to do this," one muttered. They didn't say what would happen next, but their tone told me enough. Karen had crossed the final line. That afternoon, 3 black SUVs returned, this time flanked by the FCC van. They didn't come to my house. They went straight to hers. The entire neighborhood spilled out onto their lawns like spectators at a parade. Children whispered. Phones filmed. I watched from my porch as the agents knocked on her door. When she opened it, they stepped inside. 5 minutes later, they escorted her out, not in cuffs but clearly under some kind of order. She was pale, trembling, but still tried to speak. "This is harassment," she shrieked. "I'm protecting my community." But the agents didn't even glance at her. They guided her into one of the SUVs and shut the door. The convoy sat for a minute, then rolled away, leaving her house dark and silent. For the first time in years, the cul-de-sac felt calm. No signs, no group chat blasts, no spray paint or ribbons. Just quiet. But even as relief settled over me, a part of me stayed alert. Karen wasn't the type to vanish quietly. Federal warnings weren't handcuffed. There would be hearings, letters, legal maneuvers. She'd be back somehow, some way. And in the back of my mind, a new question began forming. Not what will she do next, but who might she drag into this next? Because Karen didn't just lose power. She lost face. And people who build their entire identity on control will burn the world down rather than admit defeat. I tightened the guy wires on my mast, double-checked my locks, and updated my documentation one more time. This wasn't the climax. It was the midpoint. And the next escalation, I suspected, would make everything so far look tame. The morning after Karen was escorted away, the cul-de-sac felt like it had been washed clean. The air was crisp, the sky painfully blue, and for the first time in months I drank my coffee on the porch without scanning for movement out of habit. Neighbors smiled as they passed. Some even waved. Jeff wandered over with a grin and muttered, "Guess the queen lost her crown." But underneath the quiet there was a strange, empty tension, like the hush before a thunderstorm. Karen had been removed, not erased. And everyone knew it. For about a week things held steady. No flyers, no late-night trespassing, no anonymous threat. My antenna stood straight and tall again after the FCC team helped me brace it. I ran my station exactly as instructed, logging every transmission and leaving the rig open for their monitors. For the first time since Karen declared war, my signals were clear. No jamming, no interference. Just clean, steady airwaves. It almost felt too easy, like a trap. Then the first ripple appeared. A brand new account on the neighborhood Facebook group posted an ominous warning about shadow operators and secret deals with the feds. The style was unmistakable. Same odd phrasing, same dramatic capitalizations. Karen hadn't disappeared. She'd simply shifted platforms. And because she was no longer physically present to direct her bored minions, her online persona grew more theatrical. She framed herself as a whistleblower persecuted for exposing illegal transmissions. It worked. A handful of her loyalists, people who'd enjoyed her power when it was turned on others, picked up the torch. They started leaving comments about radiation from the tower and government cover-ups. One even accused me of weaponized weather manipulation. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so effective at sowing paranoia. I documented everything and forwarded it to the FCC contact. They replied with a brief, clipped message: "Continue operating normally. Investigation ongoing." That was it. No reassurance, no timeline. Just the sense that something was moving under the surface. 2 nights later I woke to headlights sweeping across my front yard. Not a van this time, a black pickup idling at the curb. 2 men sat inside, silhouettes against the dashboard glow. They didn't get out, just stared at my house for a full minute before rolling off. I caught the whole thing on my security cameras, but the plate came back to nothing when I checked. Probably temporary or out of state. My gut told me it wasn't random. Karen had always been good at stirring other people into acting on her behalf. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. It wasn't from the HOA, at least not officially. It was from a law firm in town representing a concerned group of residents. The letter accused me of operating hazardous unlicensed transmissions and demanded immediate removal of my equipment, to preserve neighborhood health. It read like a Karen draft polished by a paralegal. Empty threats, but threats nonetheless. Jeff was furious when he saw it. "She's weaponizing lawyers now," he said. "This is harassment." He was right, but it was also her pattern. When direct action failed, she outsourced. First the board, then city services, then random residents, now lawyers. Always escalation by proxy. That evening, the interference returned, but different this time. Not static, not jamming. Someone was rebroadcasting my own transmissions back at me, distorted, delayed, like a mocking echo. It was sophisticated enough to require equipment and planning. This wasn't just Karen ordering a gadget off the internet. Someone was helping her now, someone who actually knew radios. I filed yet another report and, this time, called my FCC contact directly. He picked up on the second ring. His tone was sharper than before. "We're aware. Keep your logs. Don't engage." I asked if Karen was behind it. He hesitated, then said, "We believe she's enlisted outside assistance. We're tracking it." Outside assistance. The words rattled around my head as I sat in the glow of my equipment that night. Karen had always been dangerous because of her entitlement and persistence, but she'd also been clueless about the actual tech. If she'd found someone who knew what they were doing, the game had changed. 2 days later, the board called another emergency meeting. Jeff urged me to skip it, but I went anyway. Curiosity outweighed caution. The community center was packed when I arrived. Karen wasn't there, of course, but one of her allies, a wiry man I'd never seen before, stood at the podium. He introduced himself as a licensed communications consultant hired by concerned residents. He launched into a slideshow full of ominous graphs and fake data about radio contamination zones and signal bleed. It was a performance, nothing more, but it was slick. The crowd murmured, unsettled. When he clicked to a slide with my address circled in red, I stood up. Calm, deliberate. "Everything you're presenting is false," I said. "I am federally licensed and in full compliance. The only illegal transmissions detected on this block came from the home of the former HOA president you're working with." The room fell silent. The consultant's face flushed. "We have proof," he said, waving a sheaf of papers. "We'll be filing an injunction." I smiled. "Good. File it. And when you do, include your real credentials, because the FCC agents monitoring this case will want them." That landed. He closed his laptop and left without another word. The board didn't vote, didn't speak. They just stared at me like I was a storm they couldn't stop. When I got home, Jeff was waiting on my porch. "She's got a partner now," he said flatly. "You saw him. This is her next move." I nodded. "And it's her last." That night the black SUVs came back, but this time they didn't stop at my house or hers. They parked at the community center. Agents unloaded cases, set up what looked like portable receivers, and began scanning. The FCC van rolled in behind them, antenna bristling. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't just watching anymore. They were actively hunting. For the next 2 days, unmarked cars patrolled the neighborhood at odd hours. Neighbors whispered about sting operations and undercover agents. Karen's online posts grew more frantic, accusing me of bringing in secret police. Her loyalists started backing away, their comments dwindling to silence. Then, just after midnight on the third night, the trap snapped shut. My radio lit up with a strange burst, a transmission on a restricted emergency frequency. Within seconds, my phone rang. It was my FCC contact. "Stay inside," he said. "We're moving now." I went to the window. Across the street, a house 3 doors down lit up with flashing red and blue. Not Karen's, one of her allies. Agents poured inside. 10 minutes later they emerged carrying boxes of equipment. Illegal transmitters, jammers, laptop. The wiry consultant was led out in handcuffs, head down. The next morning, Karen's online accounts vanished. No more posts, no more rants. The law firm withdrew its letter. The board issued a bland statement about unfortunate misunderstandings and the importance of respecting federal law. For the first time in months, the airwaves were clean. No jamming, no echoes, no static. Just my voice carrying across the country, steady and clear. But even in that calm, I stayed cautious. Karen had lost her partner, her platform, and her cover. People like her don't fade, they regroup. And somewhere out there, she was already spinning herself as the victim, planning her next move. I checked my logs one more time, updated my security system, and brewed another cup of coffee. The game wasn't over. But now I had allies who understood exactly what I was up against. And when she came back, and she would, I'd be ready. The week after the FCC's raid felt like living in a parallel universe. The cul-de-sac returned to its postcard facade. Kids on scooters, sprinklers ticking, neighbors grilling on driveways. From the outside it looked like Karen had been erased from existence. Her house sat dark, curtains drawn, mailbox overflowing. The HOA board pretended nothing had happened, sending out bland newsletters about landscaping. Even Jeff said, "Man, it's like the whole thing never happened." But I knew better. Karen was a pattern, not an event. Patterns don't vanish, they shift. I kept my routine tight. Every morning before sunrise I'd log into my Radio Shack, run a test transmission, record the spectrum analyzer's readout, and cross-reference it against the FCC's monitor logs. Clean airwaves. Every evening I'd walk the perimeter of my property, checking locks, conduit, and camera feeds. My folder of evidence had grown into a hard drive archive. If Karen came back, she wasn't just facing a neighbor anymore, she was facing a data trail. The first sign she wasn't finished arrived quietly. An unmarked envelope slipped under my door one night, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words in block print: "You can't hide forever." No signature, no threat beyond implication. The kind of note meant to rattle you, not inform you. I scanned it, logged it, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and poured another coffee. 2 days later my security cameras caught a woman in a hoodie jogging past my house at 2:30 a.m. She slowed, looked up at my antenna, and kept going. The footage was grainy but the posture was unmistakable. Karen's power walk had a telltale swing in the elbows, even under fabric. She was back in the neighborhood, but moving like a ghost. Meanwhile, the board started sending out odd notices, new guidelines about exterior lighting, perimeter cameras, unapproved equipment. The wording was vague but aimed squarely at me. When Jeff asked the secretary about it, she shrugged. "Karen's not on the board anymore," she said. "But she's still emailing suggestions." One afternoon I came home to find my front hedge trimmed into a ridiculous shape, the top hacked into jagged spikes, the cuttings dumped in my driveway. Petty but effective. She was signaling that she could still reach me, still invade my space. I didn't clean it up right away. I photographed it, logged it, and left the spikes like a warning sign for her own ego. That night the interference returned, but not like before. This time it wasn't jamming or echoes. It was a single voice, low and distorted, sliding into my frequency mid-transmission. "You think you've won." Just once, then silence. It could have been a prankster, a fluke. But deep down, I knew whose fingerprints were on it. I called my FCC contact again. His tone was clipped. "We're aware," he said. "She's violating her warning. Do not engage. We're tracking the source." But Karen wasn't just playing with radios anymore. The next day, 2 SUVs rolled down the street, not black government ones but glossy white luxury models. Out stepped a man in a tailored suit with a clipboard. He walked up to my porch without knocking. "We're with a private security firm retained by the HOA," he said smoothly. "We're conducting safety inspections." I smiled without warmth. "You're trespassing," I said. "Leave." He didn't. "We have the authority," he began, but stopped when I raised my phone and started filming. "This will be sent to the FCC and the sheriff," I said evenly. "Your client is already under federal investigation." I suggest you step off my property." He left, but not before giving me a look of quiet warning. Karen had moved from jammers and Facebook to lawyers and now private contractors. Escalation by proxy again. She couldn't hit me directly, so she hired people to prod me. That night Jeff came over with a worried face. "She's telling people you've got government bugs in your house," he said. "Half the street thinks you're some kind of informant." I laughed softly. Let them. It's better than them believing her. But inside, I felt the weight. Karen wasn't just trying to punish me now. She was trying to isolate me, to turn the neighborhood into a pressure cooker. 3 nights later it boiled over. Around 11 p.m. my cameras picked up 3 figures in hoodies slipping into my yard from the back fence. They carried something bulky, looked like a duffel. I stayed in the dark, phone in hand, heart steady. They crouched near my antenna base, fiddling with something. One pulled out a canister, another a cable cutter. I didn't confront them. I called 911 and the FCC contact simultaneously. Within 5 minutes the first unmarked car slid into the street, lights off, followed by a black SUV. Agents moved like shadows. The hooded figures scattered but were tackled before they reached the fence. The duffel spilled open, inside, a homemade jammer and a can of accelerant. From my porch I watched as the agents cuffed them. 2 were men I'd never seen. The third, when the hood came off, was unmistakable. Karen. Even in the porch light she still had that HOA president chin tilt, but now it wavered. Her eyes flicked around, looking for allies who weren't there. She tried to speak, something about protecting property values, but the agents read her rights and guided her to the SUV. This time there were no warnings. The neighborhood had gathered again, phones out, murmuring. Jeff whispered, "That's it. She's done." I wasn't so sure. They'd arrest her, yes. She'd face charges for trespassing, sabotage, illegal transmissions, maybe even arson attempt. But Karen's type doesn't just crumble. She'd try to spin it as persecution, raise funds, hire lawyers. This was the crescendo of her obsession, but not necessarily the end of the song. The next morning the FCC van returned with a local news crew in tow. They filmed my antenna, interviewed me on the sidewalk. I kept my statements bland and factual. Licensed operator, ongoing investigation, grateful for enforcement. No gloating, no drama. Just calm, measured fact. Let Karen's footage speak for itself. By evening the video was online. Karen being led away in cuffs went viral in the local subreddit. Comments poured in about, "HOA gone mad," and "Radio guy is a hero." For the first time, the narrative wasn't hers. It was mine. Still, I stayed cautious. I reinforced my locks, installed more cameras, and kept my rig running exactly as before. Clean airwaves. Clean logs. My FCC contact called later and said, "She's facing multiple federal counts. You did everything right." I thanked him but didn't relax. Because even as Karen's house sat dark, a different kind of noise started creeping into my transmissions. Low-level probing signals, sweeps across multiple bands. Someone testing, mapping. Not her style, but someone's. Maybe an old contact she'd reached out to. Maybe just coincidence. But after everything, I didn't believe in coincidences anymore. I poured another cup of coffee, stared at my glowing dials, and smiled faintly. Karen had tried everything: cutting, jamming, doxing, trespassing, hiring, even sabotage. And she'd lost. The long game had worked. But the long game never ends. You just keep playing until the board clears or you do. And as I keyed up my mic to make another clean, steady transmission into the quiet night, I knew one thing for sure. If Karen ever came back, if she ever tried again, the record was already written. All I had to do was stay calm, stay clever, and keep the tape rolling. The morning after Karen's arrest felt like waking up after a storm. The street was washed clean, the hedges sparkled from dew, and the only sound was the whir of sprinklers. My antenna stood unbent in the dawn light, tall as a flagpole. For the first time in months, I heard nothing but static on my headset, clean static, the good kind. I brewed coffee and sat on the porch as the neighborhood creaked awake, but my gut told me the story wasn't over. Karen had been dragged off in cuffs, but Karen was never the type to stay down. By midday the news cycle had caught fire. Local TV ran the footage of the FCC raid like it was a scandalous reality show. HOA president arrested in federal radio sabotage case. The clip of her being led to the SUV played on loop with pundits debating how a neighborhood dispute had gone so far. Social media chewed it up. People across the state posted memes about ham radio hero versus HOA villain. The comments were a mix of support and conspiracy theories, some calling me a hero, others insisting I'd set her up. I stayed quiet online. Let the noise swirl without me. My logs were clean, my conscience too. But inside, I knew Karen's obsession wasn't something a night in a holding cell could cure. People like her don't just admit defeat. They reframe it. They weaponize it. Sure enough, 3 days later she was out on bail. I learned it not from the news but from Jeff, who came jogging over pale-faced with his phone in hand. "She's posting again," he said. "She's saying you're part of a government sting operation and she's a whistleblower." He showed me the screen, Karen's new account on some fringe platform, already racking up shares. She'd uploaded old photos of my antenna and called it a covert spy tower. She claimed she was retaliated against for protecting the community. I felt a flash of anger but let it pass. Outrage was her terrain, not mine. Instead I poured another coffee and started adding her posts to my growing evidence archive. If she wanted to frame herself as a victim, let her. The case file already painted a different picture. But the real twist came that night. I was in the shack finishing a late transmission when a new signal cut in. Not jamming. Not taunting. A clean, strong voice on a restricted emergency frequency, speaking my name. "You think you're safe," it said. "You're not." Then silence. I sat there with my hand hovering over the mic. The signal had been directional, powerful, and short-lived. Not a random troll. Someone had the gear, the know-how, and the nerve to break the law on an emergency band. And the voice wasn't Karen's. It was a man's. I called my FCC contact immediately. His tone was tight. "We're aware," he said. "We believe she's enlisted third parties again. We're coordinating with federal partners. Keep your station running and do not respond on air." The next morning, a drone buzzed over my house. Small, consumer-grade, but clearly deliberate. It hovered near the antenna long enough for my cameras to catch it before zipping off. 10 minutes later my phone pinged with a message from an unknown number. A photo of me on the porch that morning, taken from above with the words, "Still watching," typed over it. This wasn't just Karen lashing out. This was intimidation. Someone was trying to spook me into silence. But they'd underestimated how much practice I'd had at staying calm. I logged the drone footage, the text, and sent them to my FCC contact. His reply came within the hour. "Stand by. Action imminent." That night Jeff knocked on my door. "She's back in the neighborhood," he whispered. I saw her car parked 2 blocks over. She was sitting inside with someone. I nodded. "Then this ends soon," I said. Sure enough, at dawn 3 black SUVs rolled in again, this time accompanied by 2 white FCC vans. They didn't stop at my house or hers. They set up at the end of the street, antennas bristling like a porcupine. Agents fanned out quietly, some on foot, some in unmarked cars. This wasn't a warning visit. This was a net. I sat on my porch sipping coffee as the sun rose, pretending to read a newspaper while the neighborhood buzzed with rumor. Jeff wandered over and muttered, "Feels like a movie." "Feels like the last act," I said. Just after 9, my radio lit up with a burst on the emergency frequency. Not static data, a short encrypted packet. I keyed nothing, just listened. Within seconds the FCC's mobile antennas swung like compass needles, locking on a signal 3 houses down. Then all hell broke loose. Agents poured into the rental property at the corner, the one that had sat empty for months. They emerged carrying racks of illegal equipment, high-powered transmitters, jammers, directional antennas, laptop. And then they let out 2 people. A man in his 50s with a ham license revoked years ago for interference, and behind him, Karen. She wasn't in cuffs at first. She was shouting, face flushed, pointing at me across the street. "He's the criminal," she screamed. "He's the one. I'm exposing him." But the agents ignored her. They guided her into the van, the man in cuffs beside her. The crowd of neighbors filming was bigger than ever. The FCC contact called me 10 minutes later. "It's over," he said simply. "We've seized all equipment. She'll be facing multiple felony counts now. You won't be hearing from her again for a long time." I thanked him but still didn't relax. "She'll try to spin this," I said. "She can try," he replied. "This time, the evidence is ironclad." By evening the news had gone national. HOA president and disgraced ham operator arrested in federal sting blared across headlines. Clips of Karen screaming as she was led away went viral on Twitter. Local channels replayed my calm interview from weeks before. My inbox filled with messages from other ham operators thanking me for standing my ground. Jeff came over with a bottle of bourbon. We sat on the porch watching the sunset over the now quiet street. "Guess you won," he said. I shook my head. "There's no winning with people like her. There's just surviving." He raised his glass. "Well, you survived." For the first time, I let myself exhale fully. The antenna hummed softly behind me, steady and upright. My shack was intact. My logs were clean. And Karen was finally gone, this time not just warned but neutralized. I thought about everything she'd done. Cutting cables, planting signs, jamming signals, trespassing, hiring allies, even trying to burn my station down. All of it rooted in one simple thing: control. She couldn't stand that someone in her neighborhood was doing something she couldn't regulate. And rather than accept that, she destroyed her own life trying to destroy mine. I keyed up my mic one last time that night and sent out a simple transmission to my usual StormSpotter network. "Station secure," I said. "All clear." The replies rolled in from across the country, voices I'd talked to for years but never met. "Good to hear. Glad you're safe. We were watching." I sat back, headphones around my neck, and looked out at the quiet street. For the first time in months, the air felt light. The game had ended, not because I'd outplayed her, but because she'd finally played herself off the board. And if she ever came back, the record was already written. Every cut cable, every trespass, every illegal transmission preserved in my logs like a map of her obsession. She'd taught me a lot, about patience, about escalation, about how far entitlement can go. But mostly she'd taught me that staying calm and meticulous beats rage every time. Somewhere out there she was probably telling a new audience how she'd been wronged, how the government silenced her. But here, in my neighborhood, the story was done. The antenna stood. The airwaves were clean. And I finally had my mornings back.